Chapter 18, Born from Fire. We've already covered how roasting transforms a green coffee bean into something aromatic and dark. We've already toured the wildly different brewing philosophies that grew up in different corners of the world. What we haven't done yet is look closely at the actual machines. The specific, patented, sometimes wonderfully eccentric devices that inventors across Europe and America spent well over a century designing, refining, and competing to perfect. This chapter is about that hardware. The tinsmiths, jewelers, and shipbuilders who quietly built the entire technical vocabulary of modern coffee brewing, one small patent at a time. The French head start. France, as covered in an earlier chapter, got the whole enterprise moving around 1800 with the de Bellois pot. French inventors kept right on tinkering in the years that followed. A Paris tinsmith and lamp maker named Morais followed shortly afterward with a reversible, double-drip pot. This design became the direct ancestor of essentially every reversible filtration pot built in Europe and America afterward. Another Parisian tinsmith, Guadet, patented his own improvement on the basic percolator concept in 1820. It was notable for introducing an actual cloth filter into the design, rather than relying purely on a perforated metal grid. 2 years later, in 1822, an English patent granted to Louis Bernard Cabot took the French drip process and flipped it entirely on its head. Literally. Rather than letting water drip downward through the grounds by gravity, Cabot's design used steam pressure to force boiling water upward through the coffee instead. A Paris tinsmith named Casanova patented a strikingly similar idea in France just 2 years later, in 1824. His version added one further refinement. An actual paper filter, decades before paper filtration would become the industry standard it is today. The pumping percolator arrives. The real breakthrough came in 1827. A Parisian manufacturer of plated jewelry named Jacques-Augustin Gondéus produced what's generally regarded as the first genuinely practicable pumping percolator. His design featured an ascending steam tube mounted on the machine's exterior. That very same year, a manufacturer from Chalon-sur-Marne named Nicolas Félix Durand patented his own competing percolator. His design had one distinguishing feature: an inner tube used for the first time to spray boiling water directly over the ground coffee from above, rather than forcing it up from below. By 1825, pumping percolators had already become common household equipment across France, Holland, Germany, and Austria. These were machines working through a combination of steam pressure and partial vacuum. It's a genuinely fast pace of adoption for a brand new brewing technology. And it set the template that would dominate European coffee making for the following several decades. England and America joined the race. England and America were hardly standing still during this same period, even if their contributions took a somewhat different shape. The coffee biggin, the cloth bag filtration device covered in an earlier chapter, came into common English use around 1817. It was itself adapted from an even older French fustian infusion bag first documented in 1711. English inventor Archibald Kenrich patented his own coffee grinding mill in 1815. In America, Alexander Duncan Moore of New Haven had already secured a U.S. patent back in 1813 for a mill specifically designed for grinding and pounding coffee. A few years later, Increase Wilson of New London patented his own steel coffee grinding mill in 1818. Roasting technology kept pace with all this brewing innovation. Peregrine Williamson of Baltimore received the first American patent for an improved coffee roaster in 1820. 4 years later, in 1824, Englishman Richard Evans patented a genuinely sophisticated commercial roasting design. A cylindrical sheet iron roaster fitted with improved internal flanges for mixing the beans evenly. A hollow sampling tube let an operator check the beans' progress mid-roast without stopping the process. A mechanism allowed the entire roaster to be turned completely over for quick, clean emptying once the roast was finished. America produced its own first dedicated coffee pot patent in 1825. Louis Martelli of New York received it. His design featured a system specifically built to condense escaping steam and the volatile aromatic oils carried along with it. It returned both back into the finished brew, rather than letting them drift away and disappear. A clever, if imperfect, early attempt to solve exactly the aroma loss problem described in the earlier chapter on roasting chemistry. Similar steam condensing approaches followed from other American inventors over the next several decades. Among them, a patent granted to Anthony Benini of Milton, North Carolina in 1838, and the well-known Old Dominion pot, patented by Waite and Chenair in 1856. An unlikely inventor, the Scottish shipbuilder. Perhaps the most delightful character in this entire chapter is Robert Napier. He was a Scottish marine engineer, born in 1791. Throughout his long career, he was best known for building ships at his celebrated Clyde shipbuilding firm, Robert Napier and Sons. He spent his professional life constructing some of the largest, most complex mechanical structures of his era. Sometime around 1840, this same shipbuilder turned his engineering talents toward an altogether smaller and more delicate problem. He invented an elegant vacuum coffee machine. It made coffee through a combination of distillation and filtration, built around a polished silver globe, a brewing siphon, and a strainer. Napier never bothered to patent his design. It sat, largely as a personal curiosity, for roughly 3 decades. Then the firm of Thomas Smith and Son finally put it into proper commercial manufacture. Remarkably, they worked under the direct personal supervision of Napier himself, by then an aged inventor returning to a small mechanical puzzle he'd solved decades earlier almost as a side project. It's a wonderful footnote in the history of coffee equipment. One of the era's most accomplished builders of enormous ocean-going ships also happened to design one of the most elegant small pieces of coffee equipment of the entire 19th century. Purely, it seems, because the same engineering mind that could solve enormous mechanical problems apparently couldn't resist a small, elegant one either. The slow rise of paper filtration. Through the middle of the 19th century, pumping percolators remained the dominant coffee brewing technology across much of Europe and America. But the pure filtration philosophy, using cloth or paper rather than a metal percolating grid, never entirely went away. It steadily gained ground as the century wore on. A design called Harvey Ricker's half-minute pot, introduced around 1881, employed a reinforced cotton sack for filtration. The Kinhey pot followed in 1900. In 1905, Cawchois introduced the private estate coffee maker. It was notable specifically for its use of genuine Japanese filter paper. A real technological milestone. It marked one of the first serious commercial uses of disposable paper filtration in Western coffee brewing. That same year, Finley Acker introduced his own percolator, likewise built around a sheet of filter paper positioned between 2 perforated cylinders. The trend only accelerated from there. The trickolator arrived in 1908. King's percolator, also built around filter paper, followed in 1912. A device called the Make-Right, invented by Edward Aborn of New York in 1911, later evolved into the True Brew pot by 1920. It carried the same basic filtration principle forward, right up to the era when the sources behind this book were actually being written. Look at that sequence of dates laid end to end and a clear pattern emerges. Coffee brewing technology spent its first century, roughly 1800 to 1900, dominated by percolation. Steam and pressure forcing water through or over ground coffee, trapped by a metal grid. Then, in the space of only about 15 years on either side of 1905, paper and cloth filtration surged forward decisively. This laid the direct technical groundwork for the drip coffee makers that would eventually become the single most common way coffee gets brewed in millions of kitchens around the world. A century of tinkerers. What's genuinely striking about this entire history taken as a whole is who actually did all this inventing. This wasn't primarily the work of enormous corporations or dedicated research laboratories, at least not at first. It was tinsmiths in Paris, a manufacturer of plated jewelry, a grinding mill maker in New Haven, a Scottish shipbuilder tinkering with silver globes in his spare time, individual patent holders scattered across 2 continents. Most of them worked in trades that had nothing intrinsically to do with coffee at all. Each contributed one small mechanical improvement. A cloth filter here, an internal spray tube there, a sampling trier, a reversible pot, a paper filter borrowed from Japan. Stacked together across more than a century, these small contributions gradually built the entire technical foundation modern coffee brewing still rests on today. Every drip coffee maker, every vacuum siphon brewer, Every percolator anyone has ever used traces its lineage back through this exact sequence of small, individually modest patents. Most of them were filed by people whose names have otherwise been completely forgotten. They worked in workshops in Paris, Baltimore, New Haven, and Glasgow. Each solved one small piece of a puzzle that, taken together, changed how billions of people around the world would eventually start their mornings. An industry argues over cloth versus paper. The rise of filtration didn't settle into a single agreed-upon standard without a fight. In 1917, an industry group calling itself the Better Coffee Making Committee published a booklet on coffee grinding and brewing. It came down firmly on one side of a genuine, spirited debate splitting the coffee equipment trade at the time. It argued that cotton cloth filters, rather than paper, represented the ideal coffee-making device. That claim didn't go unchallenged. Edward A. Bourne, inventor of the make-right pot mentioned earlier, was among cotton cloth's most vocal defenders. He argued that muslin made an ideal sanitary strainer precisely because it involved no chemical treatment or questionable manufacturing process of any kind. Dr. Floyd W. Robison pushed back directly. He conceded that muslin did produce reasonably clear coffee, but not nearly as clear as paper filtration managed to achieve. He also raised a considerably less appetizing objection. Cloth filter bags, he pointed out, were a genuine sanitation problem in restaurant and hotel kitchens specifically. Kitchens rarely kept them properly clean. They lent themselves, in his words, to some genuinely unsightly handling practices. Enough of a recurring issue that food inspectors reportedly had to check on it as often as almost any other feature of a commercial kitchen. Paper, by contrast, carried no such sanitation concerns at all. Though its critics countered with a different complaint entirely, paper filtration held back valuable elements of the brew that a good cloth filter would have let through. It's a small but telling episode. An entire minor industry war, complete with published booklets, formal committees, and dueling public statements, fought over the seemingly modest question of what material should separate coffee grounds from finished coffee. Multiply that same intensity of disagreement across every incremental improvement covered earlier in this chapter. Every reversible pot, every internal spray tube, every condensing chamber. You start to get a real sense of just how much genuine debate, competition, and careful engineering went into a piece of equipment most people today use without a second thought every single morning. What's coming next? Machines and chemistry only tell part of coffee's story. Alongside every roaster patent and every percolator design, coffee was also quietly working its way into paintings, poems, novels, and the daily creative rituals of some of history's most celebrated writers and artists. Inspiring, fueling, and occasionally even appearing directly within some of the most significant creative works ever produced. In the next chapter, we look at coffee's surprisingly deep relationship with art and literature, and the writers and painters who couldn't seem to work without it.